What would you do if a little girl grabbed your hand in the middle of a rainstorm and said, "Please don't leave me"? And the only ID in her pocket was a business card that read Donahue and Associates with a phone number and nothing else. That's exactly what happened to Vera Callum on a Tuesday night in Chicago, when she was just trying to get home from a double shift. And that one phone call changed everything. Before we get into this story, if you're new here, welcome to Sadie's Romance Library. Hit that subscribe button because we post new stories every week and you do not want to miss what's coming. Now, let's get into it. The rain that night came down the way it always does in Chicago in November, not in sheets, but in needles. Cold, relentless, the kind that finds the gap between your collar and your neck, no matter how tight you pull your coat. Vera Callum had worked a double at the Blue Anchor Diner on West Kinsey, 11 hours. Her feet ached through the soles of her shoes and her ponytail had long since given up. She was 22 years old, and she was tired in the way that only people who work with their hands and their smiles all day can be tired. Bone deep, quiet, already half asleep before she hit the sidewalk, she almost didn't see the girl. The child was sitting on the bottom step of a brownstone entrance, partially sheltered by the overhang, but not enough. She couldn't have been older than 7. Dark hair plastered flat against her forehead, a patent leather shoe on one foot, the other foot bare. She wasn't crying. She was just sitting there with her knees pulled to her chest, watching the rain fall into the gutter, like she was waiting for something she wasn't sure would come. Vera stopped walking. She told herself not to. She told herself someone was probably already on their way. A parent, a neighbor, somebody. She told herself she was 22 and exhausted, and she had $40 in her checking account and a leaking radiator waiting for her in her apartment 4 blocks north. Then the little girl looked up. Her eyes were dark brown and enormous, and they held the particular expression that children only get when they have been sitting alone long enough to stop expecting rescue. Vera walked over. "Hey," she said, crouching down so she wasn't looming. "Are you okay?" The girl looked at her for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "Are you lost?" A small nod. "Where's your mom?" "Your dad?" The girl's chin trembled. "My dad dropped me off," she said very quietly. "He said Aunt Delia would be home, but she's not home. And my phone got wet and it doesn't work anymore." Vera looked up at the building. Dark windows on the 2nd floor, no lights, no movement. She looked back at the girl. "How long have you been sitting here?" The girl thought about it with the seriousness of a child, performing a calculation she didn't quite have the tools for. Since the rain started. The rain had started at 6:45. Vera had watched it begin through the diner window during the dinner rush. It was now 8:17. Vera sat down on the step next to her. "What's your name?" "Imogen," the girl said. "Imogen Whitshaw." "Okay, Imogen. I'm Vera. Do you know your dad's phone number?" Imogen shook her head. Then she reached into the small breast pocket of her coat, a little navy wool coat with brass buttons, the kind that cost more than Vera made in a week, and she pulled out a card. It was damp at the edges but intact. She held it out. Vera took it. The card was heavy stock, cream-colored. On one side, in clean embossed lettering, "Whitshaw Holdings, Rid Whitshaw," a phone number below. Nothing else, no address, no title, no email, just a name and a number. "Is this your dad?" Imogen nodded. Vera looked at the card for another moment. Then she pulled out her own phone, shielded the screen from the rain with her palm, and dialed. It rang twice. A man picked up. His voice was not what she expected. It was low and controlled, and it had the particular texture of someone who chose their words the way other men chose their weapons, deliberately, without waste. "Who is this?" Not hello, not Reed Whitshaw speaking. Just, "Who is this?" Vera straightened slightly without meaning to. "My name is Vera Callum. I'm calling about Imogen. I found her sitting outside a brownstone on West Erie. I think it's the 600 block. She's been here since the rain started and she's—" "Don't move." His voice didn't change. It didn't rise, didn't crack, didn't do any of the things voices do when people are frightened. It just went still, the way a held breath goes still. "What address exactly?" She looked up at the building number. Told him, "Keep her inside. Lobby if you can get in." "I'm 12 minutes out." The line went dead. Vera lowered her phone. She looked at Imogen. "Your dad's on his way," she said. 12 minutes. "Can we see if the lobby's open?" The outer door of the brownstone was unlocked. the kind of building where the latch didn't quite catch. Vera pushed it open, and Imogen walked in without hesitation, like the decision to trust this stranger had already been made and filed away. She stood in the small tile entryway and dripped quietly onto the floor. Vera stood beside her. She didn't know what she was waiting for exactly. She supposed she was waiting for a father. She was not prepared for Reed Whitshaw. He arrived in 9 minutes, not 12. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled to the curb, and two men in dark jackets got out first, scanning the street with the practiced efficiency of people whose job it was to assess threats before their employer's feet hit the pavement. Then Reed Whitshaw stepped out. He was tall. That was the first thing. Tall and broad-shouldered in a charcoal overcoat, the kind that cost more than Vera's rent. He moved quickly but without urgency, the walk of a man who understood that composure was its own kind of power. He had dark hair, slightly silvered at the temples, and a face that would have been handsome in a straightforward way if it weren't for the expression on it, which was not worry exactly, but something compressed and hard that sat behind, worry the way a fist sits behind a glove. He came through the lobby door and his eyes went immediately to Imogen. The little girl made a sound. Not a cry, not a word, just a small involuntary exhale of relief, and walked toward him with her arms out. Reed Whitshaw knelt on the tile floor of a damp lobby in a $1,000 coat and caught his daughter with both arms and held her there for a long moment without speaking. Vera looked away. It felt private, the kind of thing you shouldn't watch. When she looked back, he had stood again. Imogen was beside him with his hand on her shoulder. His eyes found Vera across the small space, and he looked at her the way men in his position look at things they haven't accounted for, carefully, completely, filing everything. "You called," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, you stayed with her. She was alone, in the rain." Vera said it simply because it was simple. "I wasn't going to leave her." Something shifted in his expression. It was small, barely visible, the way a shadow moves when a cloud crosses the sun at distance. He reached into his coat. "Let me. Please don't offer me money," Vera said. She didn't mean it to come out sharp, but it did. "I'm sorry. She was a little girl. You don't need to pay me for that." Reed Whitshaw looked at her for a moment with the card still in his hand, and then he did something she didn't expect. He put the card back. "All right," he said. "Then let me at least give you a ride home. It's still raining." "I'm fine, the offer stands." He said it without pushing, and then he looked at Imogen. "Say thank you." Imogen turned to Vera with both the gravity and the earnestness that 7-year-olds deploy when they understand something has mattered. "Thank you, Miss Vera," she said. Vera smiled. "You're welcome, Imogen." She looked at the little girl's bare foot. "You lost your shoe." Imogen looked down. "It came off in a drain. I'll get her another pair," Reed said. And there was something how he said it, flat, immediate, already done in his mind, that told Vera this was not a man who permitted problems to remain unresolved. She declined the ride. She walked home in the rain with her ponytail dripping and her feet aching, and the image of a little girl with one shoe burned into the back of her mind. She did not think she would see Reed Whitshaw again. She was wrong. The Blue Anchor Diner opened at 7 in the morning. Vera was there at 6:45, tying her apron in the kitchen and listening to the morning shift manager, a woman named Paulette, complain about the espresso machine. At 7:15, a man she didn't recognize came in and sat at the counter. He was big through the shoulders with a jaw like a shelf, and he ordered black coffee and a plain bagel, and he didn't look at the menu once. He had the particular stillness of someone who had learned to make themselves unremarkable in public spaces and wasn't quite succeeding. He came back the next morning, and the morning after that. On the fourth morning, Vera set his coffee in front of him and said, without preamble, "You work for Reed Whitshaw." The man looked at her steadily. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You're not a very good liar," she said pleasantly. "For what it's worth, I haven't done anything wrong, and I don't intend to. You can tell him that." The man said nothing. He finished his coffee and left a 20 on a $6 tab. That afternoon, her shift ended at 4. She was in the alley behind the diner putting on her coat when a car slowed at the mouth of the alley and the window came down. Reed Whitshaw was in the back seat. He looked at her through the open window with the expression of a man who had made a decision and was now acting on it. Get in, he said. I need to explain something to you. You've been having someone watch me, she said. That's a bad way to begin an explanation. I know. He didn't offer an excuse. Please get in. There's something you need to know. It concerns your safety. She should have walked away. She knew that. She was 22, and she had no reason to trust a man with a car full of security and a name on heavy cream cardstock, and no title because he didn't need one. She got in. The car drove east toward the lake. Reed Whitshaw sat beside her with his forearms on his knees, leaning slightly forward, and he spoke in the precise, measured way of someone who had decided to tell a truth and was choosing exactly how much of it to tell. My name is Reed Whitshaw, he said, as if she might have forgotten. What I do is not entirely what it looks like on a business card. I run a number of legitimate enterprises. I also run other things that are not as easily explained. I have enemies, not abstract enemies, specific people who have specific reasons to want to reach me through the people I love. Vera looked at him. What does this have to do with me? Someone followed my car the night I picked up Imogen. They have you on camera, standing in that lobby, holding her. He paused. They don't know who you are yet, but I needed to find you before they did. The inside of the car was very quiet. Who are they? She asked. A man named Gareth Voss. He said the name the way you say a thing you've said times in private, and once out loud, waited, deliberate. He controls distribution networks in the Midwest, and he's been trying to take pieces of territory that aren't his. I've been stopping him. He's decided that the most efficient way to stop me is to threaten the people I care about. Vera looked out the window at the city going past. I'm not someone you care about, she said. I'm a waitress who made a phone call. He doesn't know that. She turned back. What exactly are you proposing? I want to move you somewhere safe for a few weeks. Somewhere my people can see the exits. We'll handle Voss, and then your life goes back to normal. And if I say no? He looked at her directly. Then I strongly recommend you go somewhere on your own and stay there until this is resolved. But my resources are better than yours. She almost laughed. That might be the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me. He didn't smile, but something around his eyes shifted slightly. I find honesty is more efficient. Vera thought about her apartment with the leaking radiator, her $40, her 4-block walk home in the rain. She thought about a little girl with one shoe and a borrowed seat in a damp lobby. Is Imogen safe? She asked. He nodded. She's been with her grandmother since Wednesday. Good. Vera folded her hands in her lap. Okay, she said. Tell me what somewhere safe looks like. It looked like the 14th floor of a residence tower in River North that Reed Whitshaw apparently owned, or was affiliated with in a way she didn't press him on. The apartment was clean and quiet with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a view of the Chicago River and a kitchen stocked with things someone had actually thought about, not just items bulk purchased. There was a note on the counter in small, precise handwriting. Towels in the hall closet. Wi-Fi password is on the router. Call this number if you need anything. Below it, a number she did not recognize. She did not call the number. She spent the first 2 days working the puzzle of her situation. She called Paulette and said she had a family emergency. She called her landlord and said she needed 2 more weeks. She stood at the window with her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, and she watched the river, and she thought about all the ways this could go wrong, and then she thought, with the particular stubbornness that had kept her functional since she was 16 years old, that she wasn't going to let it. Reed came on the 3rd evening. He knocked, which she noted. He did not simply walk in. She let him in and offered him coffee, and he accepted it. Black, no sugar, and he sat at her kitchen table like a man who had forgotten how to simply sit somewhere without accounting for the exits first. She watched him catalog the room, and she said, I'm not going anywhere. You can relax. He looked at her with the slightly off-balance expression of someone whose read on a situation has just been adjusted. I'm not. You clocked the door when you walked in, you sat with the wall behind you, and you checked the window before you sat down, Vera said. She shrugged. My uncle did the same thing. He was a cop for 23 years. It's a habit. Reed was quiet for a moment. Your uncle was a police officer, was. He died 4 years ago. She wrapped both hands around her mug. He taught me a lot, including that the people who always sit with their backs to walls are almost always the same people who would take a bullet for someone else, without thinking about it first. Raid looked at her across the table, with an expression she couldn't entirely read. It was the look of a man encountering something he hadn't expected and wasn't sure what to do with. "Why did you stay?" he asked. "The night you found her, you could have called the police and kept walking." "She looked at me," Vera said simply. The way she looked at me, like she'd already stopped expecting someone to stay. She shook her head. "I wasn't going to be one more person who kept walking." The room was quiet for a long moment. "Imogen asked about you," he said. "She wanted to know if Miss Vera was okay." Vera felt something shift in her chest. "She's 7 years old and she's worried about someone else," she said softly. "That's a good kid." "She is," he said, and the two words had more weight in them than everything else he'd said combined. She understood then, in the way you understand things, not through explanation but through tone, that this man had wrapped his entire interior life around his daughter and was standing in her kitchen 3 days later, because whatever happened next, he had made a promise to himself about what he would and wouldn't allow. "Tell me about Gareth Voss," she said. "Not the version you think I can handle. The real version." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he told her. Gareth Voss had been trying to consolidate control of distribution channels across 6 states for 3 years. He was methodical and patient, and he operated the way corporations operate, by acquiring assets, managing liabilities, and eliminating obstacles. The obstacles in his vocabulary were people. Reed Whitshaw was the primary obstacle between Voss and the infrastructure he needed. Voss had tried twice before to reach Reed through proxies. Both times, Reed had anticipated it. The third attempt, the one currently in motion, was more direct. An associate of Voss's had been in position to take Imogen. Her route to school had been mapped for 6 weeks before Reed discovered it through his own network. He had altered the route, but in the alteration, something had gone wrong. A miscommunication between his driver and his sister-in-law Delia, and Imogen had ended up alone on West Erie in the rain, and a waitress named Vera Callum had made a phone call, and now she was in the story whether she'd meant to be or not. Voss's people had identified the brownstone from street cameras. They had footage of a woman, dark ponytail, blue diner apron visible under her coat, making the call. They were looking. Reed's people had found her first, but only by 48 hours. "You could have told me this immediately," Vera said. "Yes, why didn't you? Because you would have been frightened. And frightened people make poor decisions." "Or," she said carefully, "you could have trusted that I'm capable of handling information about my own situation." He looked at her. She held his gaze. There was a pause that had something particular in it. Not quite an argument, not quite an understanding. And then he said, "You're right, I should have." She nodded. Okay, yes, okay. I'm not going to pretend the last 3 days didn't happen or that I'm not in this, because I am. So tell me what comes next." What came next was Reed's plan to surface Voss's network through a controlled exposure, using information his people had collected over 6 months to trigger a federal investigation that would make Voss radioactive enough to back down. It was careful work. It required 2 more weeks. During those 2 weeks, Vera learned several things about Reed Whitshaw. He was punctual to the point of seeming compulsive. He came every evening at 6:30 and stayed for exactly 1 hour, then an hour and a half, then 2 hours, in increments so gradual she suspected he didn't notice himself doing it. He drank his coffee black. He ate the food she made without comment the first time, and then, the second time, said this is very good in a tone that suggested he had not expected it, and was slightly annoyed by that fact. He asked questions about her life with the careful attention of someone assembling a picture they have a reason to want accurate. He did not talk about himself unless she asked, and when she asked, he answered briefly and factually, as if emotion were a category of data rather than a thing that happened to you. She learned that his wife had died when Imogen was 3. A car accident. He did not offer details, and she did not ask for them. She learned that he had started his professional life in corporate finance, legitimately, quietly, before inheriting not just the family business but the shape of it. She learned that he spoke to Imogen twice a day by phone, and that the voice he used for those calls was slightly different from every other voice he used. Quieter, less armored, with something in it that she could only describe as careful love. She also learned that when she laughed at something, he watched her with an expression he had probably never looked in a mirror long enough to identify. She chose not to point that out. On the 11th evening, he arrived and sat at the kitchen table and said, without preamble, "There's a complication." She sat across from him. "Tell me." Voss moved faster than we expected. He has someone inside the network we've been using to build the exposure. The federal timeline is compromised. He paused. "We have another option. It carries more risk. To who? Primarily to me." He looked at her steadily. "I can meet with Voss directly. Under circumstances where he believes he has the upper hand, my people would be positioned. If the conversation goes correctly, he backs down. If it doesn't," he stopped. "If it doesn't, things resolve another way." She looked at him across the table. "You're going to walk into a room with a man who has been trying to destroy you, and you're going to gamble that your people are positioned better than his, essentially. And if you're wrong? Then Imogen goes to my sister-in-law permanently. And you," he paused, "you go home. This will be over regardless of the outcome. You're not part of the operational calculus." Something about the word calculus made something in her chest do something she wasn't ready to name. "You're not describing this the right way," she said. "How am I describing it? Like it's a logistics problem." She looked at him. "You're talking about walking into something that could kill you." He was quiet. "Imogen would lose her father," she said. Not as an accusation, just as a fact she felt the need to name out loud. He looked down at the table, and for the first time since she had known him, which was 11 days, which was not very long, and felt very long, he looked like a man who was carrying something he hadn't put down in a very long time. "I know," he said, very quietly. "Then don't do it alone," Vera said. "Whatever you need that you don't have, tell me." He looked up. "You're a waitress," he said, not unkindly, just precisely. "I'm a person who stayed in a rainstorm for 90 minutes because a little girl needed someone to stay," she said. "And I'm good at reading rooms, and I notice things, and I think that's not nothing." He looked at her for a long moment. "There is something," he said, very slowly. "It's small, but it matters." It was not a small thing, as it turned out. What Reed needed was a second pair of eyes in the restaurant where the meeting would take place. Someone who would be unremarkable, who would look like they belonged, who could see the room from the inside and confirm or deny whether Voss had positioned additional people beyond the ones Reed's people had already identified outside. Who was more unremarkable in a restaurant than a waitress? She wore her own clothes, dark jeans, a white button-down, her hair up. She sat at the bar with a glass of sparkling water and a book she wasn't reading, and she looked at the room the way her uncle had taught her to look at rooms a long time ago, slowly, and without appearing to. She counted 6 of Voss's people, 2 at the bar, 2 at a corner table near the kitchen, 2 near the front entrance. Reed's intelligence had identified 4. The 2 near the kitchen were new. She had a phone in her pocket. She typed 2 words and pressed send, kitchen side. At the table where Reed sat with Gareth Voss, she watched Reed's posture shift, barely, and saw his eyes move once to the right and back. He had received the message. Gareth Voss was a man in his late 50s, with the physical quality of someone who had once been large and strong, and had aged into something that was merely large. He had small, pale eyes that moved constantly and a smile that appeared and disappeared like a card trick. He sat across from Reed Whitshaw and spoke in the smooth, unhurried way of a man who believes he is the most dangerous person in the room. He was not the most dangerous person in the room. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. Vera did not hear it. She watched it the way you watch a play in a language you don't know, for blocking, for tension, for the moment when one actor shifts and the other one flinches. Voss flinched at minute 19. She saw it, a small movement, something behind his eyes recalculating. Reed had laid something on the table, and from where she sat, she could not see what it was, but she could see that Voss had recognized it and understood what it meant. 2 minutes later, Voss stood up. He buttoned his jacket with deliberate calm. He said something Vera couldn't hear. He walked out. His people followed, in the particular unhurried, organized way of people who have been told to stand down. Vera sat at the bar with her sparkling water and her unread book, and she let out a slow, careful breath. Reed Whitshaw came to the bar. He sat on the stool beside her and signaled to the bartender without looking at the menu. "Two, near the kitchen," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You might have saved my life. I counted some people," she said. "Don't be dramatic." He did something then that she had not seen him do in 11 days. He laughed. Not a social laugh, not a polished laugh, a real one, brief and unguarded, the kind that happens before the person decides whether they meant to. She decided she liked it. 2 days later she went home, her radiator still leaked. Her landlord still hadn't fixed it. She had $60 in her checking account, which was 20 more than before, because she'd had no expenses for 2 weeks. She was back at the Blue Anchor at 6:45 the next morning, tying her apron, listening to Paulette complain about the espresso machine. Everything was exactly the same, except at 8:15, a black car pulled up outside the diner, and a man in a charcoal overcoat got out and came inside and sat at the counter. He didn't look at the menu. Vera came over and set a mug in front of him, poured the coffee. He looked at the mug, then he looked at her. "I thought you were done with me," she said. "Imogen wanted to say thank you in person," he said. "She made you something. She asked me to bring it." He set a folded piece of paper on the counter. Vera picked it up. Inside was a crayon drawing, a girl in a blue coat with one shoe, in the rain, and next to her a woman in a yellow apron, and above them both a rainbow that was anatomically impossible given the weather conditions described. In careful 7-year-old letters at the bottom, "Miss Vera and me. Love, Imogen." Vera looked at it for a long moment. Something moved behind her ribs that she couldn't quite categorize. "She's very talented," she said. "She spent 40 minutes on the rainbow." She also asked if you would come for dinner sometime. At the house. Another pause. "She told me to say please." Vera looked at him across the counter. He was looking back with the expression of a man who had never once in his professional life needed to ask for anything and was finding the experience disorienting. "Did you tell her to say please?" Vera asked. "Or did you tell her to ask me?" He held her gaze. "Both," he said after a moment. She picked up the coffee pot to top off the mug of the man at the end of the counter, and on her way back she stopped and leaned against the counter and said, "Thursday. I'm off Thursday." Reed Whitshaw nodded once, the way he did everything, with complete economy, no excess. "Thursday," he said, and for a man who hadn't smiled yet that morning, something in his face settled into an expression that was almost one. "So here's what I want to know, and leave your answer in the comments because I read all of them. When Vera answered that call in the rain, do you think she made the right choice? And when Reed came back to that diner, was that about Imogen? Or was it about something else entirely? If you loved this story, please hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And subscribe to Sadie's Romance Library so you don't miss a single story. We have new ones every week, and they only get better from here. See you in the next one.